Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Open Badges session focusing on learning providers. Our first presenter is Pat O'Brien, Senior Vice President of the Commission on Institutions of Higher Education of the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Our second presenter will be Veronica Diaz, Associate Director of the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative. And then we'll transition to an interview with our three guests, where we're pleased to be joined by Richard Culatta, Director of the Office of Educational Technology, U.S. Department of Education. We're going to transition now to an interview format. I have a few questions for our guests, and I'm going to start with a question for Richard Culatta. Richard, what do you see as the role of the Department of Education in fostering effective, high-quality applications of innovation, such as badges?
So I think it's a great question. Thanks for asking. I think one of the most important things that we can do, and one of the powerful roles the department can play, is highlighting good examples, times where things are working really well. We try to do that as we work, as we explore and find examples where badges and competency-based learning are happening. Because at the end of the day, for us, it's really about competency-based learning and not about badges. That's just a nice way to get there. One of the things that I'll say, just to add one more quick example that we are doing specifically in this area to help out, is we have a large, sort of a big project called Connected Educator Month. It starts tomorrow in October, and if you're not familiar with it, I'll post a link here in just a second. But this month around, we'll have millions of teachers that are going to be participating, and this time around, we are including an option for teachers to get badges, and it will be the largest implementation that we can think of badges in education. That said, they're very easy to get. They're very simple. You basically just have to do show some basic skills related to technology and learning, and you get a badge. But we did that very much on purpose because we think we need to lower the barrier of entry and make badges really easy to get and get people comfortable with using badges as a currency for professional learning skills. And then after that, I think ratchet up the rigor. But you'll see there'll be hopefully hundreds of thousands of badges that will be released throughout Connected Educator Month. And so those are some examples of what we're doing.
Great. Yeah. So we did a both and in this course in terms of the challenges of the badges. So we have some of you on the call have probably already achieved some of these badges. We have 6 badges that are pretty rigorously tied to the challenge assignments, but we also have a participation badge that's really easy to get. So trying to help people also understand the value of different types of badges. Some are good for simple motivation, some are much more rigorous representation of accomplishments. Let me move to a question for Patricia. Pat, critics of accreditation say that it's anti-innovation and it seeks to perpetuate the status quo. How do you respond to that criticism?
Thanks, Deb. I think this is something that is often said about accreditation. Sometimes it's said by people who know very well what accreditation is, and other times it's said by folks who don't know much about accreditation. Let me say a couple of things about it. First of all, not surprisingly, I would disagree with the characterization of accreditation as anti-innovation. I think that all accreditation standards include somewhere in them language such as fostering responsible innovation. And I do think that responsible as an adjective for innovation is important here. There's a lot that goes on in the wide world, and many people have entrusted to accreditation the responsibility for checking out a lot of those new innovations or new ways of doing things. And so I think because accreditation is a process of peer review, that you're taking smart people who have worked in higher education for a long time and asking them to devote their time and talent to the consideration of quote-unquote innovative educational initiatives. I think that's another reason why accreditation is so important, the notion of it being peer review, because because there is so much at stake with all of that federal financial aid, that's one reason why I think accreditation can be valuable. But also, as I was saying earlier, accreditation as also a mechanism through which improvement on the campuses can be fostered, that in the course of accreditation reviews or working on accreditation reports, the opportunity for the institution to think seriously across the institution about what can we do better, how can we better respond to the needs of our student body and of prospective students out there who for whatever reason are not yet being well served by the way that our programs and services are structured. So that would be at least an initial response to that question. I'd be interested to see what others might have to say about it.
Yeah, I'd be interested, Richard, in your reaction to that question, which I might phrase a little bit differently for you, which is, what do you see as the role of the Department of Education in collaborating with the accrediting institutions to find the right balance between innovation and having standards that remain useful?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually, it's as you said, we just had a meeting. I was going to say just the other day. I guess it's been over a month now. But recently, we brought in all the accrediting agencies, and we basically said, how do we square this? How do we deal with the fact that we need to transition to a competency-based approach, right, where we can actually see what skills students are learning, and with the fact that we actually need an accrediting organizations, so maybe make sure there isn't fraud in the system. I was just meeting with the Minister of Education from Ecuador, and they don't have an accrediting system like we have in the States, and he talked about sort of the rampant fraud that's happening. And so that's a tricky balance that we have to create, because we want to make sure there's more innovation. We want to make sure that we're leveraging something that's competency-based, but still having those checks and balances. To the credit of the accrediting agencies, there have been some accredited institutions. Some of those have been mentioned here. Southern New Hampshire is one of them, that are leveraging, that are shifting to competency-based. Again, whether or not they're using badges, that's sort of a separate piece. But it's much too slow. It takes a very long time for them to get through the process, to get approved. And so one of the things that we are encouraging and working with the accrediting agencies to do is say, how do you speed that up? How can we possibly accelerate the innovation at which folks can look at leveraging these badges? Because frankly, I think that as time goes on, the value of that piece of paper that we have, the piece of paper that says this is your degree, this is your diploma, is actually not going to be worth a whole lot if along with it you can't say, here's what skills I actually bring along with that piece of paper. So we've got to find ways to accelerate it, and that's one of the things that we're doing right now and working with the accrediting agencies and saying, how do we do this? One final thing I'll mention really quickly, we put out a very clear call that within our current legislation, there's something called a direct assessment clause in our higher ed legislation, which basically says that you can apply, even under the current rules, to have a competency-based, basically using badges or other tools to try to shift a competency-based model, and that we can approve that even in the current approach, and those institutions can still receive federal financial aid. So we're being as creative as we possibly can internally, while at the same time encouraging the accrediting agencies to find ways to move faster at approving competency-based programs.
Great, thank you. I think that Veronica, I mean, this is such an important question. I think it's useful to get responses from all three of our presenters on this. And, in terms of speeding things up, most of us don't have much control over how that happens in accrediting process. But Veronica, I think you and a lot of people that you work with in higher ed associations like the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative, we see that we do have opportunities for speeding things up when we can find good examples and give them better visibility and help our constituents figure out how to replicate successes. And along that track, or maybe along another track, could you please respond to the same question?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we try to do to support the thinking and activity in this area. We just finished a one-year pilot, as a matter of fact, on our own badging environment and system and sort of infrastructure. And what we learned is that badging is actually very, very new to the higher ed community. It's very emergent. A lot of people don't know what it is. They think it's kind of gaming. They don't have necessarily serious associations with the tool. But slowly, as we build an awareness in the community, we're finding out that a lot of folks are now thinking about trying at least a small pilot at their institutions with faculty. And so I think, you know, in some ways, badging kind of supports sort of the rise of the individual. Maybe downplaying a little bit the institution, but upplaying the role of the learning and the documentation to a very broad audience. You know, who is the audience for badges? Well, it's everyone. Who isn't it, right? It's your network, your peers. I mean, if you think about it, you've got a few hundred people in your LinkedIn network and maybe a few hundred in your Facebook network, but do you really know what those people are studying? Let's say somebody is wanting to switch to a different sort of professional area. Do you know what they're taking, what institution they're at? And badging has a way even to help you know more about your network as you are looking to hire people or looking to join groups that are developing in a certain area. There's so much new stuff happening in higher ed that it's so valuable to know what other people are involved in and studying, just to be able to join up with that. So, we're trying to kind of build an understanding and exposure and then sort of a pathway for people to begin experimenting if it's something that they're interested in doing. We think there's a lot of potential and a lot of connection to existing best practices that we're missing, kind of that component that is recognition and dissemination of information. And we think the badge does a really good thing to support that.
Thank you. I mean, EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative has, for a very long time, been an organization that helps us, jostle the status quo. So thank you for your efforts. I'd like to ask Richard another question, and it's about validation. And so usually when you start getting into discussion with someone about badges and you describe what they are, what are the first things that comes up is validation, credibility. How will anyone know that this is a good badge? Why would I want to trust what this badge says about the badge holder's competency? And so the credibility of the badge issuer and, in fact, of the badging process is a critical component of the badge's value. What do we think can or should happen in academic and professional arenas to advance the credibility of badges and to enhance the methods for validation?
I was on mute again. Sorry about that. So great question. I think this is actually the key where most people get sort of tripped up around badges is we come from this system where it's sort of the authority from on high that has to say that this course is allowed or that you can get credit for it. And so we think that needs to exist in the badge environment as well, or some people do. I would suggest that one of the great values of badges is that you don't have to have that, and that what actually makes a badge valuable is the weight or the sort of the reputation of the organization that is giving you the badge. So it's a trust framework. It's a trust framework, and it's something that we use all the time. We just do it implicitly, right? So when you're going to apply for a job or when somebody's going to apply for school, they have their transcript, they may have their resume, but at the end of the day, one of the things that's very powerful is who you worked with and what you did while you were working with that person. I remember when I first was applying for jobs, I remember nobody cared what classes I'd taken, right? I was really bummed because I'd spent all this money and time taking these dang classes. Nobody cared. What they wanted to know was, what did I do? What had I done? What examples could I give? And were they with people that they knew and trusted? And if I had said, and I didn't at the time because this was before Google, but hypothetically, if I had said, yeah, I helped improve Google's search algorithm on their main system, right? That is more valuable than any piece of paper that I'm going to bring. And so I think it democratizes this idea, democratizes the sort of accreditation because it really can be whoever is valued, whoever's voice is valued and issues a badge, then that trust is able to be represented through the badge in a way that right now we kind of just have to do through telling stories and other ways that are really hard to put on a job application, frankly. So I'm really excited about that piece of it. Would love to hear what people think as they go along, but I think that's really the value that we're going to see here. And the value, I'll mention one other thing on that, the value that some of those badges, some of those accreditors, quote unquote, the people giving the badges, may be very meaningful in certain contexts and not in others. There was a conversation on chat a little while ago about what happens, what if I want to show all these badges? There are times where there may be some wonky, wonky weird badge from some group that nobody in the rest of the world would notice, but among people who care about that topic, that may actually be very valuable and well respected. And that's okay. And I don't have to show all badges to everybody. We can sort of, curate and show collections of badges as we want them, but it really democratizes who can say what learning experiences are valuable. And that's what makes me so excited about badges.
Pat, do you see sort of a direct correlation between the validation that's provided by accreditation frameworks and how that can apply to badges? Or maybe you see accreditation processes changing in the future to be more inclusive of credentials other than degrees and certificates? What are your thoughts on this question?
Thanks, Deb. I appreciate very much the question. I think it is certainly fair to say that accreditation will change in the future because accreditation has changed significantly since it was first established. Someone in chat a while back made a comment about accreditation being focused on inputs, and I think accreditation has a focus on input, but I would disagree that accreditation is only focused on inputs. That may have been true a quarter century ago or 40 years ago, but certainly I would say now that the emphasis in accreditation is on outcomes, on what students can do, on what they know and are able to do. So I'm sure that accreditation will change. Exactly how it will change, I don't have my crystal ball fired up today, so I don't want to make any predictions. I think it was Yogi Berra who said that predictions were dangerous because they were, especially when they were about the future. But I think the notion of higher education changing and accreditation changing along with it is certainly valid. Richard, I smiled a little bit when I heard you talking about trust, because certainly in higher education that's a word that gets used a lot. Trust us, we're doing a good job. Trust us, our students are learning. And so I think one of the things that higher education and accreditation have learned over the years is that trust is wonderful, but it needs to be supported with data. And there needs to be some good, clear evidence of what it is that students know and are able to do, some good, clear evidence of the quality of the experience. Here in New England, the Commission did accredit one of the very first direct assessment programs, competency-based programs, and that was a good process. The institution worked very hard on its proposal, and it was clear that it was well integrated into the overall university and that the outcomes, the competencies that had been established were going to stand those students in good stead. I think my answer is kind of wandering a little bit from your original question here, Deb, and I apologize for that, but I think that accreditation will in the future respond to different types of credentials. I think everyone is concerned about what we might call mission creep, and so I don't think that the agencies are going to be engaging in that. But by the same token, as institutions become more and more creative about the ways in which they certify student learning, accrediting agencies will also respond by validating and by monitoring the quality of those efforts.
Thanks, Pat. Very helpful response. Veronica, I think that, because this movement toward badges and other types of learning innovations is going to change a lot of the things that our constituents have been accustomed to doing for decades, maybe centuries in some cases. What do you see as some of the concrete professional development changes that need to happen to make these new models of learning more readily applied in higher ed?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes I think, and I'm pleased to see when technology is a little bit of a driver towards more positive things that people were kind of stuck on in the past. And to me, you know, badges like that one image that I showed is just one more way to go back and rethink courses and disaggregate those outcomes into more concrete, granular things that are more digestible for students, that they can actually measure progress. So, you know, moving away from the bigger course into little chunks is always a very good thing. We already know a lot about how successful that is. In the professional community, there's a whole, you know, kind of body of work that people are involved in, sometimes almost like a second job, where they do presentations, they mentor others, they write things, they become involved in new communities of practice. You know, they're real leaders, and most of that is completely unknown to their community unless, you know, you're physically close to them, or you live near them or something like that. And I think there's real opportunity in the professional realm to really signal what you're doing afterwards, after you graduate and kind of kick off your career. Most of us have global professional networks, and it's really great to have a way to be able to share with people what you're doing and what you're interested in. So for us, we see tremendous opportunity at the association level, at the professional learning level, to support people and help them to spread the word about what they're doing.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at time, and I just want to say thank you very, very much for our guests today.